This video is about the Oracle Envoys. These big-headed, big-bootied, bubble-blowing, belly-rolling, bumbling bastards are shrouded in mystery, and today we'll attempt to make some sense out of them. From the most obvious observations you've probably already heard, to the most unhinged speculative tangents, we'll explore all the trails I could find. So, without further ado, let's go over the forensics. First off, we have 3 item descriptions relating directly to the Oracle Envoys. That of their spirit ashes, of their horns, and of their head wraps. They are described by their spirit ashes as a monstrous band of musicians who employ sacred arts. It is said that when Oracle Envoys appear, playing their pipes, they do so to herald the arrival of a new god or age. The heralding a new age part is pretty straightforward. They are seen at the base of the Earth Tree and in the branches of the Halic Tree, both divine trees where new gods and or ages may or may not be ushered into being. But the mention of them being monstrous is quite noteworthy, as Spirit Ash's descriptions tend to be on the neutral side. And though the shape of the envoy is certainly peculiar, monstrous is not the first thing that would come to my mind. Even the spirit ashes of putrid corpses and rotten stray do not use that kind of wording when describing their objectively monstrous-looking spirits. I think this is supposed to indicate a clear difference between them and humans, but more on that later. Next, the description of their horn says, golden horn of the Oracle Envoys, profoundly weighty, its blows are sure to be felt, originally an instrument, but one that cannot be sounded by a mere human, or perhaps it is too early to sound the call? Once more, a distinction is made between the envoys and actual humans, since we see the envoys sound these horns just fine. Though we Tarnished also can play these instruments, so what does that mean? The best and least interesting explanation is game logic, that the devs compromised their lore in order to let us access this game mechanic. Other explanation could be that us Tarnished are something more than just mere human. After all, our kind is intricately linked to the plan of the god Queen Marika, so maybe this is enough of a difference with regular humans that it lets us blow the sacred horns that herald the coming of a new age, since we eventually do bring a new age ourselves. Either way, none of these explanations are very satisfactory to me, so we'll just leave that fact alone in the corner, as it doesn't impact anything of what I have to say anyway. Finally, the Envoy crown says, the soft bundle worn on the head by Oracle Envoys. Densely wrapped in several layers of cloth. No one knows what the cloth hides, but some claim to have heard a faint whimpering from inside. It must have been their imagination. Most ominously, it implies that something, somehow, is contained within these head wraps, something that whimpers softly. The wording is very ambiguous. It lets us think that this might be all false, but for the sake of forming any kind of theory, I will assume that those are definitive statements, that FromSoft is just being cheeky in their delivery. So there is something within their head, something independent of them, something that must be tightly wrapped under several layers of cloth. And this is surely relative to the head exclusively, and not to their bulbous body, for we see in the big oracle that the body is not wrapped tightly at all, displaying the skin under the loose cloth. This is the most enigmatic part of the Oracle Envoys, and we will come back to it later in the unhinged segment. Next, we have some claim and item descriptions that relate strongly to the Oracle Envoys. The spells Oracular Bubbles and Great Oracular Bubbles tells us that the claimants search for lost oracles within their bubbles. That, the name of the spells themselves, and the fact that Oracle Envoys and claimant are the only instances of such bubble spells being used in the whole game, implies a strong connection between the two. That said, it kind of ends here for what can be gleaned at face value. It doesn't inform us of much on its own, we know barely anything of the ancient dynasty, and there doesn't seem to be any direct link between the race of the claimant and the envoys aside from their use of bubbles. Finally, there is one last thing of note about the envoys. They drop strips of white flesh when killed. Its description says it is taken from a bloodless creature. But the envoys definitely spill some sort of liquid when hit. In fact, turtles do bleed actual red blood when hit, but they also drop this item so I don't know how much we can trust the whole bloodless thing. But again, we'll come back to this later, just keep that in mind for now. That's it for what we can confidently assert about the Oracle Envoys with what little info we're given. There are inhuman legless creatures that show up near divine trees, blowing their trumpets to herald a new age or god, and they have had dealings with the ancient dynasty in some way long ago. Now, let's see what other tenuous connections we might be able to draw. And thankfully, we recently got a bunch of new hints. The trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree is out, and it is brimming with helpful little bits and pieces that can help us unravel the lore of the game. In his DLC analysis, Tarnished Archaeologist raises an excellent point, that the Shadow Erdtree we see in the distance is actually two trees, one strangling the other, just like Stranglefigs behave in our world. It grows around a larger tree, slowly depriving it of nutrients and light, strangling its trunks and roots. In the Land of Shadow, this process seems to be revered in some way, as we can see an elegant huge structure built below the Shadow Erdtrees with the express purpose of collecting the sap that's dripping from the strangled tree. Furthermore, I noticed these twisting pillars at several points in the trailer, which seem to symbolize the very concept of coiling and tree strangulation. This would reinforce the idea that the whole Erdtree strangulation is a voluntary process in the Land of Shadow, rather than a case of an Erdtree being parasited by a strangler. And with that in mind, let's return to the Oracle Envoys, and more specifically to their instruments. I think the shape of these trumpets symbolizes the growth of a strangled tree of some sort. I posit the following. The small one shows a straight tree trunk with nascent strangler branches at its base, barely starting to coil around it. The medium one shows the same tree in a more advanced stage, with the strangler branches having coiled around the trunk all the way to the top. The big one shows the final stage, where there seemed to be an explosion of life, all strangler branches now just as imposing as the central straight trunk. Also, when the Envoys are actually playing their instruments, they are pointing them straight up, resembling even more the appearance of a tree. To me, this looks like a pretty strong link between the Oracle Envoys and the Shadow Erdtrees, or at least with the very concept of coiling and strangulation for the purpose of bringing new life. And indeed, the strangled tree leaks out golden sap, and the strangler tree is growing with life about as vividly as the strangled one. So if we add this to the idea that this process is sacred in the Land of Shadow, then it would be a fair assumption that the Oracle Envoys either came from here or have visited it at some point in the past, maybe precisely to herald the coming of these Shadow Erdtrees. But this isn't the only thing that connects them to these lands. Another motive that we find in the Land of Shadow is that of snakes. We know that there will be lava, seen here and here, which is exclusively associated with snakes. But mostly, considering how prominent Mr. Snakeboy is, appearing in the cover art and having his own statue, it's pretty much guaranteed that snakes will be of a certain importance in the Land of Shadow. But what do snakes have to do with Oracle Envoys, I hear you ask? One thing that piqued my attention is that special bulbous shape at the base of every Envoy horns. This is a constant in all three designs. It is certainly not a usual feature of brass instruments in our world, so I think it is supposed to be reminiscent of the pungi. Traditionally used by snake charmers, the pungi is a wind instrument that commonly has the same sort of bulbous shape at the base. Moreover, the pungi has two pipes, which you could say somewhat mirrors the many pipes of the Envoy horns. Just like a snake coils around its prey, the strangler tree coils around its victim, heralded by the call of the Oracle Envoys. This theory follows for the Alec tree, as it has a second trunk, though now broken, and it follows for the Erdtree as well. Indeed, there are clear signs of a previous tree strangulation below the capital. Moreover, snake charmers are usually shown to be playing their pungi while sitting down and wearing a head wrap. This could be an inspiration for the Envoy's design, though I won't die on that hill.
But wait! There's more!
Looking closely at the Envoy crown, we see a good number of vague symbols. The wavy interweaving pattern on the cloth is quite unremarkable. Though certainly very finely made, it just shows the sort of design that is found overwhelmingly everywhere all over the lands between. Most of the medals show this radiant design with straight lines coming from the center, which is simply too vague. I couldn't find any solid match for the symbol. But 2 of those medals have a very distinct, very important and recognizable symbol. A circular sigil with a circle in its center, surrounded by 8 smaller circles. We find this sigil at the top of each divine tower, a smaller version within the pillars that form it, and in the eye of the fell god. This symbol is tied to the ancient civilization of the giants, and I believe that snakes were hugely influential in those times. As per the serpent god's curved sword's description, we know that there once was a snake-based religion long enough ago to now be forgotten. Maybe long enough ago to have been contemporary to the giants. And what do we see proudly displayed on the forge of the giants itself? Snakes. If the giants were ready to carve the image of snakes on what must have been by far their most valuable construct, then snakes must have been a pretty big deal in their culture. The serpent god's curved sword also says that this snake religion employed the use of sacrifices. This goes well with the fire giant offering up a limb in sacrifice to his god to obtain power, and that could align with the idea of a divine tree being offered in sacrifice in order to obtain its life juices, further reinforcing the whole concept of snakes and strangler trees being intricately connected. Which all loops back to the Oracle Envoys thanks to this little medal. And what do we see in the Land of Shadows, where the tree strangulation is supposedly revered? This guy, wearing a bunch of medals, all with the same symbol of a circle surrounded by 8 smaller circles. I'll admit, this connection is brittle. It's pretty hard to see, and this guy's design might be nothing more than a coincidence. We'll have to wait for the DLC to confirm this one bit. But one bit we don't have to wait for is the Envoy Longhorn. It acts as a middle stage for the representation of the strangled tree growth, but it looks pretty dang similar to the Caduceus staff, real-world medical symbol of 2 snakes coiling around the staff. And all of this is why I think that the Oracle Envoys are linked to both snakes and strangler trees. We have a few more things to cover, but from now on we are getting into truly unhinged speculation territory. Yes, this was the sensible, down-to-earth section up until now. So strap in, it's gonna get bumpy. I'm gonna say it once for good here, so I don't have to repeat it for every single point going forward. The following speculations are just that, speculations based on very little evidence. It might not be the case, it might be a bit of a stretch, it might be completely wrong. I'm not gonna die on any of those hills, those are not statements of fact. Just trying to make any sense I can out of this obscure subject. Also,
if you have any opinion that deviates from mine in any way, shape, or form, you are not fucking welcome here. And by here I mean Earth. You're like, oh.
Alright, let's tackle their supermassive heads. The Envoy crown description makes it very clear that it's hiding something of importance. Enough so to take description real estate anyway. The oracles are described as monstrous, so maybe the fact that there is such secrecy surrounding it means that the content of the head itself is what is making them monstrous? Either way, very hard to tell. We can have a look at what other examples of big heads there are in the lands between, see if anything else resembles this. At first, surfing on the whole snake conspiracy, I thought I had a pretty good case for this egg-headed man-serpent. He's waiting at the heart of Volcano Manor, in some sort of throne room, with people kneeling to him, and he has a giant egg that I thought was growing from its head. But on closer inspection, he's just wearing it, cracking the shell to poke his head through. The pumpkin heads superficially fit the bill, but that's about it. They're crazed gladiators that find some solace in their weird headgear, but nothing suggests that their head would be giant. Another candidate could be Sorcerer Luthat, and Sorcerer Azor by extension. Looking at Lusat specifically, there are some obvious similarities. The overall shape is of course very reminiscent of the Oracle Envoys, but it seems like it was once fully covered by a head wrap, which still covers the eyes just like the Envoy head wraps do. Now, of course there are differences between the two. The Envoy's head seems to be soft and malleable, as opposed to the solid crystal grooves that have taken the Sorcerers. And though the similarity with Lusat's spherical head is striking, Zor's has a totally different shape. If there is indeed a connection here, at best I'd wager that those are different strains of the same sort of head growth, further reinforcing the idea that whatever is within the Envoy head wraps is indeed a living, growing thing. That's the least bad explanation I can provide for that. Due to their lack of legs, their white skin, their lack of red blood, and their insisted upon inhumanness, many people have suggested that the Envoys may be some sort of albinorics. Artificially created life forms of pale blood, pale skin, some with fading legs and others with bulbous heads. Well, I both agree and disagree with that theory. The first generation albinorics are losing their legs indeed, but it seems quite different from the Envoys. The first gens must crawl on their hands, whereas the Envoys are completely adapted to their leglessness. There might still be a connection here, but only tangentially at best. And for the second gens, one could say that their dumpy heads and protruding bellies are reminiscent of the Envoys' anatomy, but their dad belly are not quite as glorious as the absolute dump trucks of the Envoys, and their heads are not a one-to-one either, with the Envoys retaining a somewhat normal humanoid face, whereas the second gens are entirely bloated. Again, we only have a vague resemblance to go off of. More damning than that, all LBs can drop albinoric blood clots, which the Envoys do not drop. Instead, the Oracle Envoys drop strips of white flesh, which isn't dropped by any albinoric whatsoever. Furthermore, the strips of white flesh say they come from bloodless creature. Though we demonstrated earlier that this is not the most reliable description, does contradict directly the albinoric blood clot, which as the name implies, even though it isn't red, is absolutely considered blood of some kind. All in all, that leaves us with a bunch of vague, unreliable similarities and untrustworthy contradictions. So, let's take a step back. The word albinoric references life forms that have been created artificially. From the albinoric shield, we are told that all albis have been created from the same drop of primordial dew. Specifically, I believe this applies for albinorics within the lands between, all receiving the same silver blood from this locally shared heritage. But we know that there are other civilizations beyond the fog. Other civilizations that could have tried to create artificial lives of their own. One in particular has made contact with the lands between. The Numen. We know that the Numen have come from outside the lands between, that Marika is a Numen, and that the Land of Shadow, which was once a part of the lands between, is where Marika first set foot. From this, I think it is fair to assume that the whole Numen people first set foot in the Land of Shadow. In his DLC analysis, our dear tarnished archaeologist pointed out that these pillars of the ancient dynasty seem to depict the Numen's arrival on board of galleon ships. We do find traces of the ancient dynasty in the Land of Shadow as well, and would you know, what else do we find in the trailer? What seems to be the remains of galleons here and here. Thanks to this quote from Miyazaki in an interview for Famitsu magazine, we can assume that it is the arrival of Marika, and by extension of the Numen, that caused these Shadow Earth trees to sprout from the earth. The Numen may have brought this part of their culture to the lands between, imposing it on its denizens maybe. Through the claim and item descriptions, we can ascertain that the Oracle Envoys once dealt with the ancient dynasty. Maybe these oracles were once sent by the Numen to herald their arrival to these lands? Soon followed by the sprouting of the heralded strangled and strangler trees? Now, we know from the character creation screen that the Numen are seldom born. As such, they might have developed a way to artificially create life, their own breed of albinorics, and instead of basing these life forms on the drop of primordial dew that would later create our local albis, maybe they made them out of something else, something they would have had some degree of mastery over. If we assume that tarnished archaeologist findings are correct, we at least know that the Numen must have been talented seafarers. It would then be possible for them to have other sea-related knowledge or abilities, like manipulating sea-bound life forms to bring forth their own breed of Albinaurics, motivated by the low natality of their kind and all that. This tracks with the strips of white flesh dropped by the Envoys, as other creatures that drop it include crabs, turtles, crayfishes, and then octopuses, all directly or tangentially aquatic creatures. And looking back at the Claimant, who we know are obsessed with the Oracle Envoys, searching for them in their baubles and such, what else do we see them do? They are consistently sifting through currents of water with the help of harpoons. All things that could point toward the Oracle Envoys being some sort of aquatic-based trend of Albinaurics, engineered by the Numen to herald their arrival and their culture. But hey, do keep in mind that we are building speculations on top of speculations on top of speculations here. I'm just trying to draw whatever conclusion can be drawn with the tragically few pieces of evidence we are given. Worst case scenario, you'll get to tell me how wrong I was. Think of it as community service. Harbingers of a new age, heralds of strangler trees, snake charmers, and if you believe the last part, Numen Albinaurics, the Oracle Envoys are connected to many important concepts of the mythology of the lands between and beyond. If I am even just a little bit right, chances are we're going to learn some more about them in Shadow of the Earth Tree. It is true that I could have waited for the DLC to come out to see if any of this holds up, but hey, where's the fun in that? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all those things. By all means, leave a comment to tell me how all of this makes literally zero sense. Or leave your own theories that make literally zero sense. Always fun to read. And big up to Tarnished Archaeologist, whose insight was invaluable in making this video, when he didn't outright snipe some of the discoveries that I was so proud of myself for having figured out on my own. Thank you all for watching, see you whenever next time is. The Oracle Envoys are connected to many central concepts. The Oracle Envoys are connected to many concepts central to the mythology. The Oracle Envoys are connected to many important concepts of the mythology of the lands between and beyond. Fucking hell!